Thank you for tuning into the Monocle Dynasty Podcast, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. Your hosts dive deep on players, rankings, strategies, and much more. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Monocle Dynasty. And now, here's your host. Welcome back to the Monocle, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, and tonight we have another Grudge match. This one was actually specifically asked for by my guest, Nathan GN. Nate, we've been going back and forth about Spiller, and he's a big fan. He's heard my hate and my hate talk on him and everything, and he couldn't take it anymore. So he called me out, and so here we are. We're going to be grudging tonight. Sorry we got started a little bit late. I was putting my daughter to bed. I honestly got carried away watching draft day, and then I looked up and saw the time, and I was like, "Gosh, shit!" So, first and foremost, how are you doing, Nate?
I'm doing good. Glad that I can get my Spiller takes out there into the public, and glad to correct you where you're wrong here. So,
I love it. So yeah, like I said. You guys have, if you've seen me on Twitter, if you've seen some of my posts, I've done a lot of the comps and things, and it's all pre-draft capital. Obviously we don't have draft capital until tomorrow, and I'm assuming we won't have draft capital for Spiller tomorrow, so that won't change much. But then, the next couple days are going to be very exciting. But if you've seen some of those comps, I'm not the highest on Spiller. Now, I know you also had a post saying if you don't have him in your top 5, you're kind of telling on yourself, and I agree, because I really think that it's kind of crazy. As much as I'm against maybe where you have him, I definitely think it's crazy to have him out of your top 5, because dude's gonna get I don't know, 50, 75, like top 75 draft capital, something like that. Top 50, I think, is where I have him projected, like 56 or whatever it is. So unless he just completely falls out of the into the 4th or 5th round, I don't know how you can not have him in your top 5. But we're talking about the difference here from like top 1, top 2, 3, 4, like that kind of thing. So we're not going to get too crazy here.
No. Yeah, I was looking at DraftKings today, and they had the over-under at 71.5 on his draft position, so early 3rd, I guess, is about where he's expected. So to me, anywhere, late 2nd, early 3rd, somewhere in there, I figure is probably where he's going to end up. Really just depends who wants to take a swing on a running back.
Exactly. And that's basically where a lot, if not most, running backs are going nowadays. Like you get the best ones in the early to mid 2nd, and then you get the good ones, later on, a little bit later on in like the early 3rd, or whenever. It's when you start getting into the 4th and 5th rounds and things like that. That's when you have to start worrying about it a little bit. Toronto Dave wants to know who gets drafted first, Spiller or David Bell. That's probably a good question, and they probably go pretty close to each other, but I'd guess Spiller probably goes ahead. Like I said, I think it'd be pretty close, but like I said, I haven't updated in probably like a week, so that might be why Spiller might have dropped a little bit more. But I had Spiller in like the 50s, so it definitely could be that he's dropped a little bit more since then.
Yeah, I think between Spiller and Bell is actually probably going to be an interesting one. I would guess that both will be round 3 guys. But I would say that Spiller's got a better chance to be in the top end, where Bell might slip even towards the back half of that round.
Yeah, I do. I really do think that they'll both be 3rd round picks at this point. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm hoping for Bell's sake, because people have talked about him dropping to the 5th round and all that kind of stuff. But we're being too nice right now. Like I said, you called me out. This time it's personal. Yeah. Let's get down to grudging. So tell me all about why you love Isaiah Spiller so much, even though he wasn't even the best running back on his own team in this final year in college. What makes you? Because I don't think you do anymore, and I don't want to put words in your mouth. So, but I think you had him pretty high, at least at some point.
Yeah. So currently, before we have all the draft information, obviously here, I have Isaiah Spiller as my RB2 in the class behind Breece Hall. Based on my film evaluation alone, which is kind of like my starting point, I guess you would say, for all of my rookie evaluation, I had Spiller as my top running back in the class. When I first looked at him and Hall and Walker, that would be, it was probably February when I was doing all that. So I really liked Spiller's tape. I thought that in a kind of lackluster class, Spiller really popped for me just based on vision first and foremost. He has a lot of patience, sometimes a little too patient, especially with the O line he had there, and you could see him against Alabama. Sometimes these Alabama guys are just tearing through that line, and he's dancing behind the line. A lot of times he makes the first guy miss, but then the second or the third guy is right behind them.
Now, is it patience or is it just being slow? Because
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely one of the things you have to talk about with Spiller is that 40 time. 4.63, I think, is the one that went around the most after his pro day. And I do actually have an argument for that because, like we talked about, we're expecting Spiller in the third round. So I went back and I pulled all the running backs for the last 5 years who went in the top 3 rounds and had 4.6 speed or worse. And this is the list here. So we got Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Zach Moss, Alexander Madison, David Montgomery, Devin Singletary, Ronald Jones, James Conner, and Kareem Hunt. Now, to me, that's a lot of usable backs. Like, who's the bust on that list? Zach Moss, I guess, at this point. Alexander Madison was kind of drafted to a weird spot behind Dalvin Cook, but when he's gotten the opportunity, he's actually produced. Devin Singletary had a good year this past year. You could say Ronald Jones, he got buried behind Leonard Fournette. Arians didn't want to use him. When he's gotten the carries, he's been a decent first and second down running back. Obviously, the pass catching not there for him. James Conner just had a huge year. Kareem Hunt, he's had multiple top 24 years, if not top 12 years. I'd have to look at that on FF Spaceman's database again. But and I know you like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, so you can't start with me there. But this is a good list of backs. If you're a 4.6 speed, but you still get drafted in the first 3 rounds, I think it sets a good precedent that the teams were willing to look past the speed issue, and they still had a plan and expected that you'd be able to get a contributor. So I think Spiller's going to fall into that category where, and I'm not saying that Spiller's going to be an amazing running back. I don't think we have that amazing running back. I know people are trying to elevate Breece Hall to that level, and I'm not quite there. So I think Spiller's going to be a fine guy. I think like that David Montgomery category, if he goes to a spot where he is able to take over a full workload, I think that's a realistic outcome for Spiller.
Yeah, and I've never really been big on 40 times for running backs. I mean, it obviously it serves a purpose. I do get more into like the weight adjusted speed score. I think that's a much better way to look at things because you can't compare two backs that are 40-pound difference and run the same 40 time and be like, oh well, they did the same thing. It's like no, So we know Spiller. I think what is he 217 pounds? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm looking
something
at
around
Spaceman's
there.
database here now. 217 is what he's got him at.
Okay, yeah, so he's 217 pounds, right around 6 foot, I believe, and I mean for weight adjusted speed score, it's not terrible. It's not maybe perfect or ideal or anything like that, but it's not terrible. And once again, like this was never meant to be. He's terrible. Like Isaiah Spiller's terrible. Never draft him or anything like that because I mean, I've been on a pretty big kick about draft capital doesn't necessarily matter for like QBs and wide receivers. Like I just want the talent. I don't care where they get drafted. I just want the talent. But with running backs, like you're not going to get the opportunity unless you get the draft capital. So if he gets that third round draft capital, it's going to make a huge difference. So that's why we're just talking about like moving him around in the top 5, not moving him out of the top 5 here. So I think the weight adjusted speed score is fine. Like when you look at like a Javonte Williams from last year, he didn't have necessarily a great 40 time. Now it was better than Spiller's, but he didn't have a great thing. But we look at other things like the weight adjusted speed score, burst score, things like that. Which I have something on his burst score a little bit later, but but yeah, I mean, I guess like just starting out, because I got into like the Debbie prospecting and stuff like that this past year, and I noticed that Devin Kane, I have no idea. I call him a Kane. Everyone else calls him a chain, but he like he really blew up in the model, and I was like, man, this guy's exciting. And so of course Spiller kept falling and falling for me, and I'm like, well, not to say you can't have two teammates. Look at Michael Carter and Javonte Williams from last year, but it was just like, well, one's better than the other. And then, of course, Spiller comes out, and people in the beginning were talking about him being the RB1 overall, over Breece Hall, over Kenneth Walker, and whoever else. And I was just like, man, I'm not about that life. And then the combine happened, and everyone kind of calmed down, and everyone kind of came back to me like, okay, now Breece is number one, and so on and so forth. But I guess it's more narrative-y or whatever, but it's just like him not even necessarily being the best running back on his own team, kind of freaked me out. And Devin Akane was a sophomore, to him being a junior. And then Devin Akane is also 185 pounds, so it's not like he's this massive sophomore like stud running back that's going to go in and destroy him. Now he does have like literally Olympic speed, but I don't know. He kind of outdid him in like just about every stat. Now it was close, and I will say that Spiller had more touches, but it was like 180 touches to 130 or something like that. So
yeah,
and that was just my first point. I really just. I don't know. He just wasn't exciting to me,
Yeah, and I think that's fair. Like I said, I don't think there's anybody in this class that I'm really getting super excited about. But I guess, counterpoint the question of the shared backfield, I think this is something that we kind of do this differently for prospects versus we do it for NFL running backs. When your favorite prospect goes to the NFL and he's not being used as a pass catching back, like I think of Antonio Gibson, a lot of people's darling, and he just wasn't getting pass catching work, and everybody's like, oh, but if he ever got pass catching work, then he'd be fantastic. It's just a coach thing. This is how they run their offense, blah, blah, blah. But when it's in college, we have Isaiah Spiller, who by all accounts could have handled the workload, but they've also got this other guy who's fantastic in his own right, probably more of a college running back than an NFL running back at 5'9", 185 pounds, but still fantastic for the level. And they're splitting time between them because it just seems like a good idea to the coach. But we take that at the college level and we say, no, he should dominate touches if he's going to be good in the NFL. He should take away all that opportunity from the other guy. But in the NFL, we're like defending our guy because we've grown attached to them. So I feel like we kind of contradict ourselves with our takes on players between the NFL and college, where we expect our college prospects to absolutely dominate everyone that they go against, which would be nice. Like, that'd be awesome if every prospect could do that. That'd be fantastic. That's how you get your elite players for sure. But then at the NFL level, it's more coach's decision, and we just chalk it up to coach decision rather than the talent of the player, especially at the running back position.
No, that's a great point. I see it a lot. People ask me questions about Jameson Williams. Even people that know a lot of about what they're talking about, and they still are just like, why couldn't he start at Ohio State? Or like, I mean, I guess technically started or he played. He wasn't a big factor in Ohio State, and then of course he had to transfer over to Alabama. And is it a coaching decision? Was it? And that's why they're confused. Like, was it a coaching decision, or was it just his play and everything? So we don't know what's going on in the coaches' minds. We don't know if they're saying he can't do it or anything like that. So it's not a big knocker or anything. I wouldn't have him in my top 5 if I if I didn't think that he could be an NFL running back and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
like I said, it's more narrative-y and everything. But now I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty and get into the stats and all that. I know you had kind of mentioned bringing some advanced metrics and things. You have anything for me?
Oh, I want to hear yours first. You're probably going to touch on some stuff.
Okay.
So.
All right. So, I mean, I'm going to try and make this as quick and as non-boring as possible. But basically, I looked at a list of like the top running backs in the last 3 draft classes, including this one. And so, we end up with, in no particular orders, literally just the order I wrote them down in: Rachaad White, Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Jonathan Taylor, J.K. Dobbins, DeAndre Swift, Breece Hall, C.H., Kenneth Walker, and Cam Akers. Literally just kind of picked like 12 running backs out of the last, like the top ish running backs. There's some that I probably missed, and but I just kind of wanted to look at like the top running backs. In with those running backs, Spiller ranked eighth of 12 and eighth of 12 running backs in yards created per touch, 10th in yards per reception, 11th in scrimmage yards per touch, 11th in PPR points per touch, 12th in touchdowns per touch, 12th in yards per carry over team average, 11th in yards per route run, 11th in weight adjusted speed score, which we were talking about before, and 12th in burst score, which is also very important in my model. Burst score has I kind of proven to me at least to be even more important than a 40 time or a weight adjusted speed score. Now I include both, but I've seen some players like an Alvin Kamara that isn't necessarily like a speedy player have that burst and be able to do things because of it. Even like a Javonte Williams, I believe, has a higher burst, even though he's not a speedy, running back. So, but one I thought was interesting because a lot of people will talk about Isaiah Spiller's ability to, get receptions and be like a 3-down back and all that kind of stuff. And, I guess you could take it with a grain of salt or, whatever you want to do, but I haven't really done a lot of research on it. But when a QB was targeting, Isaiah Spiller, he was the only player of the 12 that had a QB rating under 100 when being targeted. And then you have guys like Rashad White, Etienne, Najee, Javonte, JT, JK, Swift, and Brees all over 120 for passer rating. And then even Kenneth Walker, who's talked about like as not being a receiving back and can't catch and all that kind of stuff. His QB had a passer rating of 114.6 when he was being targeted. And then we have Spiller, who was a 97. He was the only one in that group that was under 100. And I just thought that was interesting because, people have talked about how he can be this 3-down back and everything. So I thought a lot of that was interesting, especially because he was at the bottom of the list for the majority of those stats.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of an indication of where he is. I'm not here to tell you that Isaiah Spiller is going to be the next great thing. I don't think he's an RB1 for fantasy unless everything kind of breaks his way and he gets that kind of magical David Montgomery season we had a little while back where he faces all the worst defenses in the league for an 8-game stretch and gets 30 touches a game, which, it could happen, but it's definitely not something you're banking on when you're looking at taking Spiller in your rookie drafts here. I think the biggest thing for me with Spiller from the advanced side of things, and I'm actually curious if this is incorporated in your model, is that breakout age. The fact that Spiller came right in as an 18-year-old freshman and produced right off the hop. Now you can talk about how his production kind of flatlined, and a lot of that is due to a cane or a chain coming in and kind of splitting the work with them. But I am curious, does breakout age factor into the model at all? And have you ever tested for that signal?
I don't with the running backs because a lot of times we'll see look at like a Najee Harris or somebody like that, sure. And that's just one example. But look at those types of players, or even a Devin Akane. He has an NFL talent player ahead of him, and so you don't always get your shot to be like the full workhorse back as a running back. You might be splitting carries, you might just not get on the field at all. And doing more work with the Debbie stuff, I've actually really picking up on the fact that a lot of these guys don't hardly touch the ball in their first year, even the good ones. Yeah. Or if they do, it could be minimal, or it could be half of the workload that they get the next year, and so on and so forth. So I don't really freak out with breakout age, but I do have age in the model because I do think for running backs especially, age is pretty important. And so that's where Spiller does look good. He's young. One thing, and I don't want to just hate on the guy. One thing that does stand out is he does break a lot of tackles. And I keep going back to Javonte Williams, but it's because they're kind of similar-ish players where they're not that fast running back, but they break a lot of tackles. And those his age, the fact that he's probably going to get decent draft capital, and then the fact that he does have a pretty good juke rate and all that kind of stuff, really does stand out. And that's half the reason why. For me, he ends up being my RB4 in the class. And so, I think there's just too much there to like hate on him, like I said, but it's just I'm not overly excited about him either. Like he ends up being in like there's similar scores in Beth, with players like Trey Sermon, Zach Moss, Ronald Jones. Miles Sanders is probably the best one. Naheem Hines, Deontay Foreman, Tevin Coleman, Niall Davis, and Ronnie Hillman. So like that. It's not the best list in the world, but there's some decent guys in there that you can feel okay about, and he might even have a little bit more because, like you said, Ronald Jones can't catch. Even Miles Sanders hasn't necessarily proven to be the best running back, but like he's also had his moments, and at some point, people were talking about him being like a top 12 running back in Dynasty or maybe even beyond that. So definitely could at least have some excitement at some point.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's interesting. I wonder if the breakout age, if there might be something to. It's a really good thing if they break out early, but it's not necessarily a bad thing if they don't. For some of those situations, right? If they get the opportunity and they do hit, then that's obviously a good sign, I think. And if they don't get the opportunity and then they hit later, we shouldn't really ding them for that. So that's one thing I like. You touched on a few other things I like. I like the ability to break tackles. It's something that really shows up on tape for me. When I was doing my film evaluation, the lateral agility, he's got a wicked jump cut. He gets away from guys. He breaks tackles from all the best players in the SEC. I see Toronto Dave there. He loves early production. Yeah,
he does.
Everybody loves early production, and they should. So yeah, I think Spiller's got that tackle breaking ability, which for me is something that really sticks out when watching film, because I really ding guys who don't break tackles at the college level, because I just figure there's no way they're going to break tackles at the next level. And at the next level, you're going to get tackled a lot earlier and a lot more often than you're used to at the college level. So Spiller being able to break tackles is a big deal for me. I think it's one of those things that looks good on tape and it looks good in the film room the day after the game, and it's one of those things that keeps you on the field as well. So having, that baseline, I guess, not exceptional reception share, but that baseline of pass catching ability, that should give us that kind of check mark, if not like a gold star. So there's just a lot of things for me that Spiller checks off as a box, and not to say that he aces them all with flying colors. We're not talking about Saquon here coming out, but for me, I think he's a very adequate back, and in the right situation with enough opportunity, I think we're talking about a guy who can definitely be an RB2, and he's going to be 20 years old, and if he starts to produce at 20 years old, then we all know what the Dynasty community is looking for right now in terms of running backs. We're seeing everybody start to downgrade the 26-year-old guys, the Dalvin Cooks, the Derrick Henrys, the Alvin Kamaras, all these guys who've been mainstays in our lineups for so long. Now they're starting to take that age hit in Dynasty value, and we're all looking for that next thing. And you see it with guys like Antonio Gibson, who I referenced before. All it takes is one season where he shows some promise, and the Dynasty community will absolutely elevate his value to untold heights. And I think that's something that you could see with Spiller, where he could actually just be like a great value pickup if he kind of drifts towards the back end of the first round in rookie drafts. But he actually turns in a pretty solid season, and then he gets overvalued by the community just because of that age.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point about like comping him, or maybe not comping him, but just talking about like a David Montgomery type season. He could definitely have that with the with the juke rate and with the tackle breaking ability that he has. It's going to take something like that. I don't think he's ever going to have, and I saw, like I said, he had the least or like the 11th most touchdowns. So like, second to last. He didn't score a lot of touchdowns in college. He didn't score a lot of receiving touchdowns. In fact, he scored the same amount of receiving touchdowns in his final year as Kenneth Walker did, who barely caught the ball. So,
yeah.
He like scoring touchdowns was not really his game. And I don't know if it's going to be his game in the NFL, but if he can have that like perfect part of the season, half the season or whatever, he can definitely gain value. And the thing for me is even though I'm not the biggest fan, and for whatever reason, like this does not sound like a grudge match at all. I feel like I'm almost like defending him at this point, but it's a pretty big drop off from him, and maybe it's because of draft capital at this point, like projected draft capital, but it's a pretty big drop off from him to the next guy for me, and so like it just. And that maybe that talks to the class, but then you have a huge grouping of players where I feel like, they're all kind of the same or very close.
Yeah.
The only thing I would say is because he isn't that like overly exciting player, and the receiving game didn't look all that great. I wonder if they might either bring him to a team that already has like a third, give him send him to the Chargers, and they have Austin Eckler, as the receiving back, and Spiller, as the 1-2, or there's so many third down backs in this draft where they draft Spiller and then 2-3 rounds later they draft one of these other guys and they draft the James Cook or whoever, and all of a sudden he's the third down back. And so I think that's going to take away from the ceiling of the player. But if they're giving him 200 touches or something around there, then he's still going to be a decent like RB2 RB3 kind of stash for you. But that's where, like, for me, like, once again, it's nothing to do with like hating the player. He's in my top 5. I said he's my RB4. But I've seen so many people talking about still drafting him at like 106, 107, 108 even, and I can't get behind that. Like I don't think the ceiling's there, and we don't know the floor yet. Now maybe that could change in the draft capital, and he just goes to an amazing team, and you could say, okay, he could score some touchdowns, he could get 200 touches, whatever. But for now, I can't really see him in the first round. Like there's too many other guys that I really like. In fact, we both have a wide receiver that we like right there around the end of the first. So I think I would much rather take those guys and let him fall to somebody else if that's what it's going to take. But once you get into the second round, I really have no issues taking him if these other guys that I really do like that I would take at the end of the first. Some of them are probably going to fall into the second round. If they're already gone, then I have no problem taking them at that point.
Mm-hmm. So, as of right now, I'll pose a question to you: which of the where's the line with the wide receivers? Like, which wide receivers, as of right now, do you think you would take? Like, we're talking about Jahan Dotson, who we both love. You'd take Dotson over Spiller. Who else is in that category for you of guys that you'd take before Spiller?
Assuming that David Bell does still get third round draft capital, because I mean, like, even though I'm like I said, I'm the guy that's talked about like I don't care about draft capital or whatever, there obviously becomes a point where it's like I'm not going to draft somebody in the early second if he's a 5th round pick, that kind of thing. So assuming that he does get third round draft capital, I would take David Bell over him. After that, I'm a big Trey McBride guy. I would take Trey McBride over him. But after that, really gets into that tier like I'm talking about, where it's just a bunch of guys that could be good and everything. And I would probably end up taking Spiller at that point. I don't really, I'm not like in love with any of those players to where I'm like, I have to go get this one guy or or anything. I feel like there's going to be people that are going to fall in love with Christian Watson. There's going to be people that are already in love with Sky Moore and so on and so forth. And like that's just not me. Like I'm fine if I get them. I'm fine having those players, but I don't have to go out of my way. I don't feel like a need to go out of my way to get those players. If they fall in my lap, great. If they go a couple spots, behind where where I would think they're going to go, that's perfectly fine. I will take them, but I'm definitely not, people are talking about taking Sky Moore, at the end of the first. Like I'm not doing it. That's not me. So I'm but they're all kind of in that same tier, but I would probably put Spiller at the top of that tier, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, I think I was just looking at the third round here. There's a few teams obviously that could be in the market. You got Houston, the Jets at the top of the rounds. You've got Atlanta has been another one that's been mocked a few times. Then you get into the later part of it. I've seen a few times people mocking running backs to Arizona. Could obviously get some pass catching work there. John taking the emotions out of it, just like Beth. That's a good one, TD.
I'm a robot, baby.
I've even seen Tampa Bay as a mocked landing spot. So I think Spiller is definitely one of these guys where you're really going to have to pay attention to the landing spot, and you're really going to have to decide for yourself how much you like that landing spot and evaluate whether you think he's going to be able to take over that line share work, because he is a guy who, for me, is going to need volume to be productive. I'm definitely in that camp. I'm just kind of more leaning towards I think he is going to go to that spot, because I think one of these teams that needs a guy like that, and if they can get him in the third round, somebody like Houston, I think, would be like, hey, in the third round, we get this guy and we lock up our workhorse running back for the next 4 years, and we're fine with that, and then we'll do it all again in 4 years. So I think something like that I could get behind, where, it probably wouldn't be super efficient in Houston. They're probably not going to have a great offense, but he's probably going to get 20 touches a game there. And if he does, then he's going to give you RB2 numbers. I feel pretty confident about that, just with the 2 or 3 receptions a game plus whatever he can get on the ground. So in that case, I'd be pretty comfortable if, let's just say he goes to Houston in the third round. I'd be pretty comfortable taking Spiller in the first round. It'd probably be like a conversation between him and Dotson for me. Obviously, depending where Dotson goes. If Dotson goes to like Green Bay or Kansas City in the first round, then I'm probably all over Dotson. But so he'd probably be falling into that kind of range for me, that tier, I guess you could say. And then obviously wherever the quarterbacks end up going and how high, that'll obviously throw a bunch of wrenches into our plans here as well.
We got Meme asking, what if Spiller goes to Denver? I'm guessing that's a friend of yours, or at least somebody that knows that you are a Broncos fan.
Yeah, if he goes to Denver, he can join the trio there, I guess. Javonte and Melvin Gordon re-signing, and we could get Spiller, and I don't know what that would look like. I can't imagine that Denver's actually going to do that. I saw actually Denver had a couple visits with Isaiah Pacheco, so you can tell what kind of running backs they've been looking at in the draft here.
Oh, he says it's Nubs. It looked like Nubs, but with the mask and everything, I was like, I'm just gonna act like I don't know who this is. But I really don't think that Denver's gonna take him. I think he was probably saying it as a joke anyway. But I do like. It is interesting that if Melvin Gordon is just a 1-year replacement or fill in or whatever, I guess it's possible they could draft somebody to take his spot. But I don't think it would be third round draft capital invested at that point. It'd probably be fourth, fifth, sixth even. So I'm not too worried about that. But so you have him there at the end of the first. Now you had talked about how he was your RB2 in the class after like you started factoring in draft capital and things like that. What is it about the other two main guys, if you will, in Kenneth Walker and Rachaad White that you're just like, I can't put them over this guy that's slow and doesn't have burst and
Yeah, so Kenneth Walker first, because I think that's the most controversial one. I like Kenneth Walker a lot. I liked his tape a lot. He's a great runner. I think I've said multiple times that I think he has the most pure upside in the class. Like if he were to somehow get 4 or 5 receptions a game or something crazy like that, like his upside to me as a prospect would be the RB1 for Dynasty. Like I think he's a terrific runner, and he's showed off the speed. He's got the good size. He's got everything that I want to see. But he's never shown us that reception upside. So then you're looking at an upside more like a Nick Chubb or something in an absolute best case scenario for Kenneth Walker. And if that's his absolute best case scenario, then it's not actually all that different from what I'm expecting out of Spiller. But I think Spiller's just a lot more safe in my eyes. I think he's going to get viewed as more than just a first and second down runner. And I'm not convinced about that with Walker. So that's kind of the concerns. They're definitely a tier together for me, those two. So I could be convinced based on landing spot to have Walker ahead of Spiller, and it wouldn't be that big of a deal to me. For Rachaad White, I think he's a really interesting player. He does show off great hands, real receiving ability, ran real routes out of the backfield. The problem that I have with him is he seemed a little bit um, kind of hesitant. I didn't agree with his decision making a lot of times as a runner. Didn't like his ability between the tackles a whole lot. Um, he runs kind of upright. I don't think he's going to break a lot of tackles, and I mentioned before that's something that I do look for a lot. I don't think he's going to be an exceptional tackle breaker at the NFL level. He gets stonewalled a lot. Like, you don't like to see guys who just get like stood up and drop back as running backs. You want your running backs to be able to churn through guys and fall forward, which Spiller does a lot, and Rashad White just frankly doesn't.
Well, I've heard a lot about his like upright play style and things like that. Obviously, the film talk just makes me fall asleep. Just like I've never actually listened to it, but I have heard it on pods. And then when I wake up, I'm like, oh yeah, never mind. Let me go look at these numbers again. But yeah, I mean, I know obviously like there's some things going against Rashad. The age, 23 years old compared to 20 for Spiller and for Brees, and then just the fact that it took so long for him to actually break out. But I'm definitely giving him a break there. Like, I feel like especially with running backs, it's like once you do it, I'm good. Like, I don't really care. Even with Spiller, like he technically had a better year. Not even technically, he had a better year in his second year than he did in his third year, and it was mostly because of a cane. But I think that I don't really care necessarily that he didn't do it again in his third year, or that he got worse in his third year or anything. We saw what he could do in his second year, and to me that shows that he can do it, and that's all I really care about with the running backs. Obviously with wide receivers it's completely different. Like, if you fall off in your third year, then I start freaking out because I'm like, well, what happened? Was somebody just that much better than you? Why did you, or was it injury related? Like, obviously you can put context to it, but
with the running backs question.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like with Olave, and I really have gone back and forth with him, and this is a running back pod, but with Olave, like I think he never really dropped off. He just didn't necessarily get better, and so like it doesn't bother me as much as like I've looked a lot at the players that have fallen off in the past in their third year for wide receivers, like a Juju, and I've seen that it actually does seem to affect, like, those guys don't hit as much. And obviously Juju hit, but then he's substantially fallen off since then. He kind of did the same thing that he did in college, but it's funny. So I do think there's something there, but I also don't think that Olave actually ever fell off. There was really good guys around him, so he just kind of kept doing the same shit. But as far as getting back to the running backs, obviously you were talking about how you would be fine with Spiller there at the end, and obviously if he is your RB2, then you're talking about Kenneth Walker and Rashad White, like, outside of the first round, right? I mean, obviously landing spot dependent and all that kind of stuff, but
I think
Walker, as of right now,
I think Walker being in that same tier as Spiller for me, he would be in the first round for me for sure at this point. I mean, obviously still pending. Got to give that caveat every time, pending everything with the wide receivers. There could be some guys who jump up for me. But I think Kenneth Walker and Isaiah Spiller for me will both be in the first round, most likely, the way things are shaking out pretty comfortably. And then Rashad White for me, I think, is probably going to fall out. I did see that he had 4 separate visits with the Buffalo Bills, which would just get everybody super hot and bothered if that ended up being the landing spot. So I'd be interested to see how the Dynasty Twitter community would react to Rashad White to the Buffalo Bills. But I'm pretty confident that when all the dust settles, I'll have Rashad White in my probably 203, 204, 205 range. Unless
is that like the worst possible landing spot for him? I mean, obviously, like, great team, great offense, and all that kind of stuff, but like the best receiving back in this draft goes to the team that never throws to the running back. I don't know.
And everybody would still love it because it's Buffalo and they think they need a running back. Yeah,
Toronto says he'd be the 101, and I mean, and I think there would be some people that would overreact like that and throw him up there. Maybe not 101, but like 104, 105, something like that. I could definitely see it. But, just as soon as you said it, and I haven't really been paying attention to that, like, I've heard some Brees talk to there. I've even heard some Spiller talk there and stuff like that. But and obviously plenty of other guys. But I haven't really heard too much Rashad. But as soon as you said it, I'm like, ew, I don't like that. Like, I don't think it's gonna be. I don't think that's gonna fit. His style, and especially like if you're saying, I mean, he's still like he was still a good running back,
Yep.
but he wasn't quite the running back that some of these other guys were. It was
Yeah.
definitely more the receiving game.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, I mean, he shows up pretty well in Beth, but it's because he caught so many damn balls,
Yeah.
and that definitely stands out. So I don't think it would match very well there.
Yeah, I think that would be kind of a weird fit. So it was pretty interesting to me that he had all those visits. But I do think that Twitter would absolutely love it. I think they'd throw him up there right away. And like, it's such a weird spot too, because like Josh Allen's going to take all those touchdowns too on the ground. So it's not like there's going to be much left there.
Yeah.
If he's not getting passing work and he's not scoring touchdowns on the ground, like what's going to be left for him? I don't know.
He's going to be Devin Singletary.
Yeah.
But all right, so like I said, it's basically those top four for me. I think that's pretty obvious. Now you have some crazy people on Twitter, believe it or not, that like don't have those as their top four, and they throw in some random person and say Brian Robinson's number 2 or whatever. But I think generally speaking, the consensus would have those as the top 4 running backs in some particular order. But like I said, after that, you start getting into like a pretty big tier of like RB3s that could be something, and like third down backs that could be something if the starter gets hurt and things like that. But we don't have to go over all of them. But are there any of those in that like what 4th tier or whatever you want to call it that kind of stand out for you?
Yeah, Brian Robinson, I would have interest totally depending on landing spot, just because he does have the pass catching work in his profile. I think that Brian Robinson is probably the guy that Pete Carroll throws on highlights of to go to sleep to every night. So I think there's probably a few coaches around the league where they are just drooling over the idea of having who they probably view as the next Derrick Henry, but we all know he's not. So I think Brian Robinson is a guy who could get elevated. I think he's actually probably got a pretty good shot of 3rd round draft capital, just because he's huge and he ran a 4.5 at the combine. So if he does go somewhere where there's a path to significant touches and actual receiving work as well, even if it's just dump off work, it's all good for running backs in PPR leagues. So I think Brian Robinson at least has the best shot to be a guy from that group there.
Yeah, I agree. I was pretty low on Robinson in the beginning. I was kind of struggling with what to do with super seniors, the 5th year running backs and everything. Mm-hmm. And I kind of went back and forth on like how to treat them this whole like during the off season. And so I had them pretty low, and then I started to like looking more into past super seniors and look at things like Najee Harris and like in Alabama we see that they don't produce as early or as quickly because they're just constantly churning out these running backs. Mm-hmm. And so like I don't want to hold him up to like a higher standard just because it's Alabama, but at the same time, like I don't want to discount him too much just because he was a 5th year guy, because he had a guy like Najee Harris in front of him. He had these other running backs in front of him before that. And so it's pretty easy to see why he couldn't get on the field or get on the field as much, just like I was talking about earlier with some of these other players. So I've definitely moved him up, and I do have him projected for 3rd round draft capital, albeit late. So like not early to where you'd be like overly excited about it, but I mean late 3rd round is a better team, so it might actually be better. Yeah. Who knows? But so I'm definitely there with you, but I think there's some other guys in there that are a little more exciting. Like I don't know how you feel about like a Tyler Badie or or even like a James Cook. I know like some people are hot, some people are cold with him. Like I kind of feel like, I mean, like once again, they're all kind of in the same tier, but it's gonna probably, or I wouldn't say probably, like it's going to boil down to where they land and how I feel about them, because when they're that close, it's like, give me the landing spot, give me the draft capital, that kind of thing. But how do you feel about a couple of those guys?
Yeah, there's a few names kind of in the third and fourth rounds of your rookie drafts that I'm going to be interested in. Tyler Beatty's one that I'm definitely interested in. The big knock, obviously, the size, 5'8", 197 pounds. It's definitely not ideal. He does kind of, for me, like a insane ceiling comp would be Austin Eckler if like everything happened perfectly for him. Eckler's got kind of the same general build. I looked into it. He weighed similarly as well coming out. Not a lot of hype, obviously, with Eckler coming out. So, in an absolutely perfect world, that's what Beatty could be. I think he's got a tremendous amount of burst, probably the best off the line burst in the class for me, which you kind of need to if you're that small. Otherwise, you'll just get swallowed up. And he had like decent contact balance. Like he is small and he does get tackled by guys who can get a hand on him and start slowing him down and dragging him down. But he has pretty solid contact balance for a guy that small too. So that's a guy who I at least think has some potential upside, and he had a huge receiving share this past year in the SEC. Had a huge year, 1,600 rushing yards as well. So definitely somebody who balled out this year in the SEC. The only knock really is the size and whether he's really going to get a fair shot because of that. So that's a guy I'm interested in. James Cook is not really somebody I'm all that interested in. I do think he's a great receiver. I also think he does not have a ton of contact balance or ability to move a pile or anything like that. Again, undersized back, under 200 pounds. I think he probably gets knocked over by the first guy who looks at him funny at the NFL level. So he's probably going to profile as a strict third down option for me. Maybe J.D. McKissick if things go right for him. Maybe he can be that kind of player. Could have some value, obviously, especially in PPR leagues. And then the other guy that I'm actually somewhat interested in later on, and I'll probably be taking a few shots on, is Keontae Ingram out of USC. Was at Texas, transferred out of there when he saw Bijan Robinson come in, and he was like, I'm not competing with that guy. So
right.
He got out
That's
of the
when
way.
people would.
Yeah. He got out of the way there, but 6 foot, 221 pounds, has that prototypical size. Really thought his vision stood out on tape. He's got a little bit of burst. He's got a little bit of receiving ability. He pass protects a little bit. Like he does everything adequately. So I kind of feel like he's one of these guys who, if he gets into a spot where he's behind an entrenched starter, then he could come in and actually have a really nice season if the starter were to go down, and then he could really gain value for you based on where you're going to have to take him in the late third or even late fourth. I've seen him in some mocks. So Keontae Ingram's another one that I'm interested in taking in the back half of my rookie drafts.
Yeah, and I think we could list off another handful of names or even more than that. But I think one thing that doesn't really get touched on very often, or at least I haven't heard it, and I listen to a lot of podcasts. So if I haven't heard it, it's probably not being talked about much. But it's like everyone has a different guy in this tier or even a tier below or whatever that they love. And, we could, like I said, we could list off so many different names, but no one ever talks about the fact that if all these guys are getting drafted in the third, fourth, fifth rounds, then like they're going to all these different teams. It's going to start affecting other running backs that we love and we're talking about already. And I'm not saying it's going to kill all these running backs or anything else, but I do think that there's a very good chance that a lot of these guys could get a Javonte Williams type hit that he just took, when Melgo re-signed.
Yep.
And, most people aren't saying, oh, Javonte Williams is dead, or anything like that. But they're like, oh, he was my RB2 and now he's my RB7. Well, what if we go with the guy like an Eckler, and we say, okay, he was my RB10 and now he's my RB16 or 17 or whatever, and we can say it about so many different players. Elijah Mitchell, I think there's a very good chance that they draft, especially with the whole Debo fiasco,
Yep.
that they're going to draft another running back because he told them, trade me, I don't want to play for you, so on and so forth, and they've said we're not trading you. Well, that's fine. They have his rights, they can hold him, they can do whatever. And maybe they say, hey, we're not going to use you as a running back and maybe things get better. But regardless, he's not going to be used as a running back whether he's on the team or not. So if that's the case, then they're going to draft somebody else, or they're going to start using Trey Sermon, or both. You know, who
Yeah.
knows? So
Yep.
I don't really feel like it gets touched on enough that like I feel like a lot of shit's going to change here in the next couple days, and you know, I'm not even saying it's necessarily a bad thing. You know, it's going to be fun. It's probably going to cause more trades in your leagues, and people are going to start freaking out and everything. So I could definitely see it being a good thing overall, but shit's about to go down.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think there's a lot of guys in these later rounds, these late tiers. Like there, we could very conceivably see like 20 some odd running backs get drafted, and just unceremoniously boot out all the veterans that were in front of them, and then depending on the capital, like if they start getting crept up into that third round, then they could really kind of put some pressure on the dynasty value of the guys ahead of them for sure.
Yeah, and I mean, I think even if it, like I said, even if it's not today or tomorrow or even mid-season, at the end of the year, if they start getting a few more touches and things, it's you're gonna start talking about, is Dalvin Cook just dead now? Like
Right.
is his value dead? Like these older running backs, is Alvin Kamara washed at this point because blah blah blah, Brian Robinson or whoever,
Right.
took his spot or took his job, and so I do think that that's going to be something we really need to pay attention to. Like out of all the players that get picked, out of all these running backs that get picked, we need to see the ones that are the most likely to hit, and then start thinking about what we need to do with any other running backs that are on those squads. And I think that'll be fun, and it'll make for a lot of good content. And we can go over all that kind of stuff. But like I said, I just think it's something that hasn't really been talked about too much.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It'll definitely be interesting. Can't wait for this draft here. We've been talking about it for
Ugh,
so long. Feels
I
like it's
know.
taken forever to get here, but we're finally here.
I know. Like I said, I watched draft day earlier today. It's just it's here, the excitement, and I can't wait for because I don't think any of it's going to go the way that we expect it to. I mean, even the best analysts, the best like the guys that are entrenched in there in the NFL, like they have no idea. They can't
Yeah.
agree. So how the hell are we supposed to know? So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I cannot wait for tomorrow night. I'll be doing a couple pods and stuff. Throughout the draft and just going over what the hell's going on with all the craziness. But I didn't really touch on you, Nate, when we first started. Just kind of jumped right in. I've had you on the pod before, but it was like a group setting with a rookie mock, so probably didn't get too much into detail. But go ahead and tell me what you're doing, where you're from, and what you got going on.
Yeah, so I'm the lead dynasty writer for JWB Fantasy Football. You can find everything JWB at jwbfantasyfootball.com. And there's a Twitter account for the JWB team as well, JWB_FF. So you can find everything that that team's doing over there. For myself, I've been putting out my rookie rankings, my pre-draft rookie rankings by position. So I've got everything out there for everybody to ridicule. They can all make fun of me as much as they want. So we'll see how that changes in the next few days here. But that's what's available for content from me out there right now.
That's awesome. So, in conclusion, do not draft Isaiah Spiller in the first round, like we've been saying all pod long. No, like I say, it'll be interesting to see where he lands and what kind of capital he gets, and then we'll be able to see. I think unlike the Malik Willis grudge match where I was saying draft him at like the end of the first, and Nelly was saying to draft him at 101. Like I feel like we're a lot closer here, where I'm saying like I could see like early to mid second, and you're saying the end of the first. So like we're not that far off. So it's really more. Like I said, it's really more like landing spot and draft capital dependent, but we just gotta, at this point, we just have to wait 24, 48 hours and we'll finally know. But I appreciate you jumping on the pod. It was a lot of fun going over Isaiah Spiller. And, I didn't really know what the hell to talk about if I was even going to put out a pod the day before the draft. But, here we are. We got it done. We talked some rookie running backs, and now we'll get to find out what else is going on. But like I said, appreciate you coming on. But for now, we're going to go ahead and get out of here. We're going to cash out. See you guys.